Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do two album reviews today. Just like last Saturday, we're making up for some missed album reviews that I had in the past. We have some Gazpacho right now. This one, it intrigues me. To say that I've been anticipating this, I think would be a bit of an understatement, just given this context. The band self-describes it as an album comprised of 4 songs based on the mad ramblings left behind by an unknown tenant in an apartment in Prague. The 4 songs each represent 4 parts of a story, ending with Death Room, which are the last words recorded within the unfinished manuscript. The manuscript contained various ramblings and diagrams which formed the basis of a diary of sorts, and the unknown author claimed to have discovered the source of what he called an evil presence in the world, one that he named the Demon. It had actual intelligent will and had no mercy and a desire for evil things to happen. The author wrote as if he had lived for thousands of years stalking this presence, and the manuscript included references to outdated branches of mathematics, pagan religions, and an eyewitness account of the bubonic plague. Now this is interesting. Do I believe the story of a manuscript? I don't know. Interestingly, the person who suggested this album also says that they haven't been successful in figuring out if this is an actual diary that they did find or if it's just a made-up story to go along with the album. But they did mention that the lyrics aren't really meant to be understood. They're more of mood setting, as they are the ramblings of someone who's lost touch with reality. As I said, it's the ramblings of a demon-possessed madman, after all. So we have an album that is going to be more, I think, experiential than any other concept album that we've listened to in the past. Now, as I mentioned, there are only 4 tracks to this, though Spotify breaks up a few of them. The first track is I've Been Walking. We'll have part 1A and part 1B. That's going to make up about 10 minutes. Track 2 is 5. Track 3 is 12 and a half. And track 4 is 19. Most of those are broken up into multiple tracks, but we'll just continue playing them. We will have stopping points after each of the full songs, not when Spotify, like this is not 4 minutes. This is a 10-minute song we're going to be checking out. So let's dive into it. See what Gazpacho is bringing with Demon and this opening track, I've Been Walking Part 1.
I've been walking tired all day.
That heavy tension into the release, that was nice. Interesting. That didn't really resolve too strongly. I figured we were going to repeat that section one more time. And we didn't. Implying a sort of, I don't know, an unendingness, but also a lack of finality.
The silent doors dip the dark. Stars and war. Obey the deep. Let it sleep forever wanting.
Very interesting to hear so much tension and harmonic buildup lead to something so light and airy. Almost calming, actually. Okay, I wonder what those voices were. I love this little bass melody underneath.
Release the trap before the trial.
Their harmonic turns are fantastic. Taking a progression that we've heard and then manipulate it to put it into like a different path to go somewhere else. That palm muted idea on the guitar. Pedal tone syncopated. That's interesting because a lot of the guitar work is chord based. This is a very, very cool start to an album. I like that ending too. First of all, it just sounds great having the cello as like this low, almost drone, just kind of holding these notes out at the bottom for such a long time. I think ultimately we're just looking at some pedal tone stuff, playing the lowest note of the chord to act as a foundation for this lead violin part. But what it feels like to me, the cello tends to use some notes that are very antagonistic to the violin melody. And it makes the song feel a bit dangerous, or at least the foundation, or possibly even maybe the atmosphere, with the violin kind of dancing between more spicier, tenser ideas and more mysterious ones. And going off of the context of the album, going off of a few of the lines that I picked up in here, it feels like the violin is a lone person in a dangerous world. That's what that felt like to me. Just based on, again, everything that I've kind of have as context on this. Otherwise, I don't know that I would have really understood what was going on here. And maybe once we dig into the lyrics, I'll be able to make a little bit more sense of it. But even just having this little bit of information, it immediately put my mind in that moment. And I love that feeling there, that mysteriousness and danger sort of combines, but not in the same atmosphere. It isn't that the chord progression is giving the simultaneous vibes. It's actually split within the two instruments present, and I think that works very well, especially with how large the cello feels surrounding the violin. That's sort of, it's singular. It's centered within the song. It's isolated. That ends up working really well. And just the passage itself sounds great. There's just a cool feeling to all of that, even if I didn't have any sort of contextual element to create a narrative component to it. I enjoyed that. It took a second to get in there. I really wondered where we were going with. I mean, I think there's like a minute and a half, 2 minutes left in the song, and violin just starts up. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Where are we going with this? But ultimately, I liked that. I liked where they took that. Even if I think it has less to do with the rest of the song musically, it still kind of fits artistically, narratively, conceptually. The rest of the song is a very different beast, though. It really focuses on two things. One is the vocal melody. We're going to touch on that in a second, but I think the part that stands out to me the most is the harmonic element of it, the chords. And that's because most of the song is chords. The bass does have some nice moving lines. It keeps the song progressing forward. The drums have a little bit of, I don't know if I'd call them immediacy. I wouldn't say that the drums are necessarily dragging the song through at any sort of pace. They're sort of just kind of keeping a tempo, keeping a pace to the song, ensuring that we never halt, but it doesn't really feel like it's pulling the song in any direction. But when we listen to the guitars, it's just a lot of whole notes chords. A whole note is just 4 beats. And most of the song is in 4/4, so it's just a note that takes up an entire bar. And that's what the guitars do a lot of the time, is just play a chord and then play another chord and then play another chord. Not a lot of syncopation or rhythmic changes to it. There are some places that get a little bit groovier with some syncopation, but I mean the chorus in particular is just a chord every 4 beats. Very rigid in its feeling, especially regarding time. But where the harmony stands out to me is in its lack of rigidity of progression. Many times it feels like the chords are moving in a linear fashion. I don't really see a larger pattern to it. It seems to use functional harmony, which is just assigning different roles to different chords within a key. And it uses that to ensure that we are constantly moving forward. We never really find rest, we never really find relaxation. The musical term for this is that we don't find uh, release. The way that functional harmony tends to work is that we have a home chord that feels the least tense, it feels the most resolved. That's what I was looking for, not release, resolve. And it feels the most balanced. Then we have ones that are leading tones that have a little bit of tension to them that lead back to these more stable ones. And then we also have ones that are just incredibly tense and want to be resolved. They want to move towards other ideas, usually with the help of these passing chords to take us back to more resolved ones like the root chord. Functional harmony it's a bit more than that. Each of these roles have names, but I think just for like a base level understanding, that's generally what functional harmony is. Just kind of break it down into maybe not exact, but simple terms. But instead of finding resolution, we sort of continue to bounce back and forth between the highly tense and the minorly tense ideas. And so it feels like we are moving between more tense and some resolution. It feels like we're bouncing back and forth between these two, but we never hit that full state of relaxation, of release of tension. And the chords just continue to move forward. What's interesting about this is that it kind of feels cyclical in that we bounce back and forth between two modes without ever hitting that full release, but also that it never really feels cyclical at all. Like I mentioned, it feels linear to me, honestly. Like being frustrated every step of a journey, never really reaching your destination, but not enjoying the path to get there either. this makes up a majority of the track, but it also expands out of this frequently too. We will have these extended moments of no release at all, and then out of nowhere that will turn into something very complete, very balanced, very uplifting and positive, and almost a sense of serenity after being in that flurry of tension. The song also bounces between these two extremes, not being able to find any release of tension and then basically no tension at all. The song is hyper focused on duality of extremes, never really finding a midpoint, never finding a medium. I find that to be interesting. I don't know what it's supposed to represent. The idea of constantly being locked in tension could be searching for answers and not finding any, but bouncing back and forth between serenity and distress, I'm not sure. But I do want to leave this section just with one bit of praise, and that's that I absolutely love the way that they can craft so many unique feelings within the song just based on their chords, that they don't stick with basic 4 chord progressions, that they're constantly exploring new ideas. And like I mentioned, even on some of their transitions, I love their harmonic turns as well, where we will explore this feeling for such a long time, still linear. Each of the chords being passed doesn't really create a pattern or a loop as far as I can tell, but it still retains a feeling. And at the end of it, we kind of push into the next chord, which we expect. That's the same chord that, or the same feeling that we've been experiencing. But then the next chord will start to have a little bit of change. The chord after that will push through and lead into the next section, which has a very different feeling to it entirely. It isn't just we were doing this, now we're doing this. It's we were doing this and we're slowly going to modify it and gradually shift into this new emotion. And basically, I just want to praise their harmonic writing in general. The chordal writing on this is fantastic, and I think it's most of what kept me interested and engaged through the entire thing. Primarily just because it's the one thing with depth to it. Honestly, it's rather simple writing when we look at melody and rhythm. Harmony, it's deep, it's dense, it's constantly grabbing my attention, and I love it. Honestly, you don't see this kind of stuff in rock too often. Even when we look at like progressive rocks with spicy chords and stuff, I mean, we don't see songs that are just pretty much full on linear chordal writing. And I think that their ability to work within that while still retaining these palatable sounds, it's impressive. But I did mention that there's the melody writing, and this was well done. I like the vocal melodies in here. I like the vocal harmonies too. I mean, this kind of ties into the last section, but towards the end of the song, we did have a center vocal, like a lower left vocal, and I think we had like a mid-range right vocal. I'm not entirely. There was something coming over here. I don't know. But the harmonies were fantastic too. I like multiple vocalists. Well, there's probably just one vocalist doing backing track, but whatever. Vocal harmonies, I'm a big fan. But the vocal melodies too, I like these because they're playful. They're playful in harmonic ways. What's interesting about chords is that when most people think of chords, they think, I'm playing the guitar and I play a chord, or I'm on the piano and I play a chord, a series of notes packed together. But in music, chordal information isn't presented just by the chords. The melody is also playing a note on top of the chords. That note changes maybe more quickly than the chord does. But at any moment, you have your lead note on top of the chord, and it is also part of the chordal information. It's part of the harmonic information. And so, you can write a sad chord progression, but if you don't necessarily lean into that in your melody writing, you're going to kind of undercut that emotional resonance. And you can absolutely lean into it in sort of an overdone way and create, especially if you're going for something sad, something ridiculously sappy. Melody writing is just as important to the emotional resonance of a track as the harmony is. Sometimes I'd say even more so. What we get here is a melody that tends to push against the harmonic information in ways that I think generally works. As I mentioned, a lot of the harmony here is tension. There are moments where we have release and this sort of freeing suspense, lacking of what do we call it? Yeah, just freeing, kind of floating, kind of vibe. But for the majority of this track, there is tension. There is unresolved harmonic information. The vocals, though, the vocal melody is not necessarily cheerful, but the timbre is bright. The harmony, well, the contribution to the harmony tends to be a bit on the brighter and positive side. It's catchy, it's kind of poppy, it's fun to listen to. It's not necessarily everything that the harmony isn't, but it certainly pushes a little bit more into the opposite of what the harmonic element is doing. I find that to be interesting. It lightens the mood, I think, in a lot of places. This could be a much darker, heavier song than it was. I attribute a lot of that to the vocals. But it also knows when to lean back into that, too. There are some really spicy, not resolutions, but the way of ending a phrase. The last note of a sentence, or the last note of a 4-bar melody, before starting it over or moving into the next idea. And instead of landing on something that has a lot of balance to it and contributes to a more consonant harmony, they'll add quite a bit of tension to it. The harmony leans into this too, but the melody finally works well with what the chords are doing. It's interesting to see this dance in this whole concept of some scribe going through the world hunting for this demon, this evil presence. To hear this dance between the atmosphere of the song and the narrator, who is presumably the voice of the writer of the manuscript. That sometimes they lean into the darkness of the atmosphere, and other times they rub against it, trying to alter it or change it, acting as an opposition to it. It makes those moments when we have the uplift and the chords represent something brighter, more resolved and balanced, almost as a winning moment for the vocals, finally dragging the harmony, the atmosphere, into that brighter side. It never sticks though. And by the end of the song, when the cello and the violin come in, we have the two ideas, the atmosphere and the main melody, separated once again. I think that's all I have to say on this one. Which is interesting. I think I've had more to say about Gazpacho in the past. We checked out a song called, well, also it was The Walk, right? Something like that. That seems familiar to me. I think I had a lot more to say about that one. I was kind of caught off guard with this one being as simple compositionally as it is. Again, at least from the rhythmic and melodic perspective. There really is just a lot to say on the harmonic side of things. There are a couple ornamental ideas that I enjoyed. There were some bells that popped up somewhere in the middle of part 1, I think it was. There was the transition idea at the end of part 1 into part 2. Lots of ways of kind of introducing more narrative elements to the song, but I don't really have anything to add on to that. They existed, they pulled us from one idea to the next, and that's about the extent of my understanding of it. This is probably something that, after I've listened to the lyrics and, well, based on the little context I have about them, probably got lost with them. But kind of getting an understanding of the vocabulary and the speech and some of the ideas present, that maybe a second listen, some of these sections would make a bit more sense. Sort of like watching a David Lynch film, where the first time everything just seems random, but after a couple of watches, you start to pick up on some of the symbolism and things begin to click into place. That's sort of what I'm expecting is going to happen on this album. Regarding some of the I don't even want to call them esoteric choices. I don't think that they're strange or odd in any way. They just don't make any sense to me right now. But it's not like it's a completely different song kind of idea. It generally fits within the vibe and atmosphere of what the song is doing. We haven't had anything that just randomly goes into a new idea. Everything generally works. I just don't understand the narrative purpose for some of these ideas. So, let's hit some lyrics on I've Been Walking, part 1, and see what's going on there. Yeah. Yeah, this is confusing. As expected, I'm glad I kind of had this going in, knowing this was going to be the experience. This is set up in, I don't know, about 12 stanzas maybe, all of them completely disconnected from the other. There doesn't seem to be much of a thread between most of them. Sort of staying on a topic long enough to express a thought before moving on to something totally different. The beginning, though, starts a little cohesive. I was kind of hoping that maybe it was going to stick around this way, but it doesn't. It says, I've been walking, tired earth, old air from its birth. Could have been a part of your life. There are no deals. There's no destination, no holy land, no El Dorado, just a grain of sand. There's no salvation, no spring at Lord's, no secret mantras, no super cure. To me, this indicates somebody who, well, from two perspectives, at least from their perspective, they have seen everything this planet has to offer from its very inception until today, and there's no secret to it all. There's no destination, there's no rhyme, there's no reason. There's nothing great about it, there's nothing small about it. This earth simply is. I really like those final two lines. No secret mantras, no super cures. There's nothing fantastical about it. It's just a rock in the middle of space where we as people just happened to be created over time alongside the rest of the animals and insects and single celled organisms on this planet. It's all just random. There's nothing special about it at all. From this point on, though, things take a very distinctly different turn. It talks about the silent oars dipping the dark stars into water. Obey the deep and let it sleep. Now that does sound fantastical to me. I don't know what the deep is, and I don't know why I shouldn't wake it up. But dipping stars into water, that sounds cool. That sounds mystical. That sounds cryptic. Kind of subverted your opening paragraphs here, Mr. Manuscript Writer. It says that there's something forever wanting to break the shell of the uniform. That there's 4 horsemen in the night riding in the shallow light, having sworn to carry fire in a lithograph with hands alight. It speaks about a smiling spider fooling a fly. Later on, it says, out of the street, under the city, birds overhead flying south from the cold. Follow the signs, smoke from the chimneys. Where do you search for what you don't know? This, I think, is one of those fragments of sanity within the illusion. Nothing else really makes a lot of sense to me. It's all mystically cryptic in a lot of fantastical ways. It sounds cool, but kind of doesn't really mean much. But I like this line, the moment of clarity in all of this noise. Where do you search for what you don't know? It puts a lot of this into context, for me at least. All of these descriptions of fantastic ideas and cryptic explanations of things and warnings, it's patterns that this person is seeing that probably don't mean anything, but because they're looking for some unknown truth, everything is a hidden message. The very next line says, I lost it down a rabbit hole, and it's me you have been looking for. This seems to be twofold. There is this concept that I think they got lost down a rabbit hole. As I mentioned, when everything looks like a mystery, it can get easy to be overwhelmed by all of it. And that the second thing I think is that it represents the person being the mystery itself. Both us picking up this manuscript and wondering who wrote it, but I think also this is a message to themselves. Whether that is specifically me as an I, as in a singular person trying to figure out who you are, being a mystery, or the general concept of humanity as a whole. It represents, finally, a destination of sorts, although it still doesn't answer the question of what am I lacking in knowledge? What don't I know? If I am the answer, what was the question? And that is really what is baking this dude's noodle. The final two stanzas say, when the wind accelerated flame across the barren sands, river running backward, snake was crawling to release the damned. I'm not liking these sentences. They're written in ways that don't make any sense to me, words that flow into one another that typically shouldn't. When the wind accelerated flame, so we just have a noun, across the barren sands. We have no verb here. What is it about these flames in the barren? Is it just that they are there? I don't know. River running backwards, snake was crawling to release the damned. What is a river running backwards snake? I have to assume that that's all the description of the snake. The snake is our noun, crawling is our verb. And it was crawling to release the damned. What does any of that mean? I think it's interesting that after this moment of clarity, the text becomes more undecipherable. Indecipherable? Indecipherable. The final stanza just says, decide. The market square has been surrounded, divide, the miracle outshines. That could mean so much. The idea of market square being surrounded, a place of commerce, sort of like an open forum for people to visit. Just, it could represent culture, it could represent population, it could represent anything dealing with community in general. That it's been surrounded and must be divided for a miracle to outshine. I don't know. I knew I wasn't going to get these lyrics going into them. I'm pretty happy with what little I've pulled out of them, but honestly, I think at the end of the day, it might just be random stuff. Maybe it's one of those things where you get out of it what you put into it because there wasn't really a lot put into it to begin with. Maybe whoever wrote them, whether it is this manuscript writer or Gazpacho, just, they're lyricists putting something together and tying a story around it. It might have meant something to them. But if it did, it's going to be incredibly tough to transcribe that outside of their experience and their intention. And that's going to take us to the next track. We're not going to go to I've Been Walking Part 2. That's actually track 3. We're going to look at a short song, only 5 minutes long, called The Wizard of Altai Mountains. Let's kick it. Ooh, I like those harmonic overtones.
And a ghost of a grin. Mountain boots dancing Altai winds. Pilots to heavy lands, lost in a trance.
It was very comfortable for a time. And then the accordion came in and it just introduced a ton of darkness.
11 hours and I can't sleep. The river's crawling and the valley deep.
Really leaning into these slurred notes.
And his leather jacket. And I'm gonna follow him home.
Which is interesting given all of the staccato notes in the bells, in the guitar. Up until this point, it was a rather percussive instrumentation for the vocals to just be fluidly moving over.
And I watched it come together. I rode the train.
If I had to guess, we're in another outro. Okay. A little bit of a klezmer feel. Interestingly, this violin melody isn't too different from the end of I've Been Walking. Well, the melody itself is different, but the note choices shares a lot. Not anymore, though. All right. I'm lost here now. The outro for I've Been Walking, cello and violin. A distinct idea that I think generally worked with the rest of the song, but still it's attention grabbing. It is just sonically different than the rest of that track. What was that, like a minute and a half, 2 minutes though? It was a pretty lengthy part of the song experience as a whole, which was 10 minutes. We had an 8 minute sort of I don't know what kind of rock. We're just gonna rock. Like a big umbrella term. It's probably something else. We have an 8 minute rock song followed by this little 2 minute outro. Here we have a 3-ish minute rock song followed by a 2 minute outro. Again, the outro, once again, features violin as lead and plays something rather distinct from the rest of the track. At least I will say on this one, though, it feels less connected than it did on I've Been Walking. Now, we are technically halfway through the album, not time-wise, but track-wise. There's only 2 more songs ahead of us. Is this going to be something that they continue to do, and what is the purpose behind it? Right now, I have no hypothesis. Hypotheses? One of those, probably. Maybe there's a third pronunciation altogether. But I was actually a little unsure of myself. And, we hit the 3 minute mark, the song winds down, and we get a little bit of the accordion. And I said, I'd wager this is the outro. I was honestly expecting to be proven wrong. We were technically in the middle of the track at that point. But now we have a pattern. What does that mean? Why is it that whenever the vocals are done telling their story, the instruments run wild in a different direction? What is that supposed to represent? Is it about fleeting sanity? That when the mind is unfocused, it wanders? I don't know. How does the music represent this manuscript? All I have are questions at this point regarding that. Now, I brought up calling the songs rock. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. Most of the music is based around lighter guitar, bass, drums, and vocal writing. There are some other elements at times. We had the accordion in this one, we had the bells in the first one, the glockenspiel. But for the most part, rock instrumentation, definitely rocky sounds. But what genre is this? Honestly. Like, the hyper focus on atmosphere and chords and harmony on both of these tracks, although this one did have a little bit more focus on melody writing, both in the outro and in some of the guitar parts. I really like the opening guitar lick. It was still sort of harmonic in that it allowed a lot of tones to ring out and resonate and play around each other, but there was also a rhythmic element to it. You didn't just strum all the notes at one time, you plucked the strings one at a time. And so there was a melodic element to it that I appreciated, and it allowed variety between each of the notes. Like I mentioned, some of those had some really nice harmonic overtones to them. But most of it is focused on atmosphere, chords, harmony, foundation. The vocals are primarily the only melody we have in these. Part of me wants to say folk, just given the lighter side of this. Although I suppose indie rock might work as well, but when I think about the harmonic palette, none of those really work. I'm not sure where to place this. At times, I might even think that it reminds me of... Who is that post-rock band? That's gonna annoy me. We've checked them out a couple of times on the channel. I can't think of their name. Anyways, it reminds me of a post-rock group. So is this post-rock? It definitely takes the rock ideas and distances itself from riff writing, uh, from loud, bombastic ideas, and certainly pushes far away from the blues origins that rock comes from. Post rock seems rather fitting, but it also feels kind of folkish. Going klezmer at the end of this track certainly pulls into more folk elements too. Uh, it seems to look backwards for its harmonic inspirations, while still retaining some of the darkness and edge that rock accomplishes rather often. I don't know where to put this. It feels like a conglomeration of a lot of rock oriented genres, and I'm just curious where anyone else would place this. It doesn't really affect anything about the analysis, but it is something I think about at times. I'm just a huge fan of categorizing stuff. So I like to put things in the boxes, for better or worse. It has gotten me in trouble, even on this channel. Me putting things in the boxes people aren't happy about. I gotta change boxes. Oh, jeez. This is a rather short track, though. The opening 2 minutes, not a lot going on there. It feels hopeful and optimistic at times. The accordion comes in and puts a lot of tension on things. The drums are really light here. I do like the shift away from full strumming to individual strings, creating a bit of a rhythmic and melodic element out of the harmony. It plays around with the same harmonies that we saw on track one, though, mostly jumping back and forth between freeing and tension, sort of soaring without weight and being heavily burdened. I think after listening to this track, that's probably a good description of both of these songs so far. We have a verse chorus structure, and then the song is over. At least that rock oriented part takes us to the outro, and I don't know how to interpret this. The accordion comes in with some ridiculously fast playing, going full on klezmer here. The violin comes in with something that feels a bit all over the place. It kind of locks in with the accordion at times, but it introduces some more Phrygian ideas at moments as well, which is something that we saw the violin do at the end of I've Been Walking as well. This is what I meant when I said that there are some ideas that are shared between that outro and this outro, primarily with the violin melody. It's a very rough connection. It's not super stable. It's only a couple of threads, but it's still there. I think if you isolated both of these and listened to them independently, I think you would find quite a bit of crossover, even if the end result feels quite distinct. There's just enough of a cohesive foundation and enough DNA shared between the two melodies that I want to pair them together. A loose connection, sure, but still, they're not separated. But this gets lost at the back half of the violin solo as we push stronger into the accordion uh, key and what they're playing. And then we lose the violin entirely and return back to the opening faster accordion part. This is high energy, a lot faster than anything else we've listened to. Um, but it retains a lot of that darkness that we also saw at the end of I've Been Walking, where most of the songs have sort of struck a balance, finding brighter and darker tones and atmospheres. Both of these outros have focused within the darker, more dangerous elements. I don't know how to interpret that. I feel like the more I watch this, the more I'm going to find patterns that I don't understand what they represent. At least that's where I'm at right now. And I actually think my paralleling of this to a David Lynch film is quite accurate at this point. It's my same experience watching something like that. I see the patterns. It's just, I don't have the information to make any sense of it yet. Let's hit some lyrics. Alright, lyrically, this seems to focus on witnessing something or someone appearing, becoming real, materializing. This could be the demon of the title of the album. Said red pants and a ghost of a grin, mountain boots dancing Altai winds. We lost in a trance. He is real if you believe in him. 11 hours and I can't sleep. The river's crawling in the valley deep. Red pants and his leather jacket, and I'm going to follow him home. So apparently, this demon is real if you believe in him. If you want to see him, he's there. I feel like this is a bit of a supernatural trope that it's all there on the periphery of your mind's eye, just most people block it out as noise. And if you just train yourself to see that side of reality, you will. It says as he's waiting here in this mountain, possibly, maybe it's a metaphorical mountain. He can't sleep because he needs to be here when the thing with the red pants and the leather jacket come, because he needs to follow him home. It says, I was there when a bomb exploded, 11 hours and I still can't sleep, distant drums in the evening, loneliest sound in Altai mountains, building slow and catching up. I'm here for the duration and I watched it come together, I rode the train. So this bomb exploding could be a metaphorical sound of the demon appearing. I'm curious what the 11 hours, though, is. It seems to be significant. Is that 11 hours... I think most people are awake for more than 11 hours, so that seems like an odd number to use. 11 hours and I can't sleep. I don't know. But this bomb going off, distant drums, but it's a lonely sound. There's no one else up here in the mountains other than our narrator and the demon. And he watched it all come together. The plan finally worked, and he says, I rode the train, which again might be metaphorical, as I think most of this is, for being on board with this. Seeing the demon and deciding to follow him, traveling with him to wherever he goes. That's going to take us to our penultimate track then. This one's called I've Been Walking Part 2. I'm curious if we're going to see any lyrical or musical callbacks to Part 1. Let's dive in and find out, though we got 12 minutes of music ahead of us. And unlike I've Been Walking Part 1 into Wizards of Altai Mountains, this was a smooth transition across the songs. Keeping that eerie tension, that's been an underlying trait of the album. A little bit of an uplift though. Resolution back into darkness. The only two instruments present, both playing the same thing. The humming is an interesting timbre change, though. Almost seems like a way of just passing time. The piano has an interesting production to it, seemingly both nearby and distant, clear and loud, but hazy. Going along with my feeling that this is post-rock adjacent, we have a slow burn here. Half the song at least has been one idea, simply adding layers to it. So the piano is 3.5 beats long, and then on the second bar on 3 we get the snare hit. So a lighter version of this. Once again, bouncing between two main modes. This one having sort of the slow burn and sort of the bombastic sound that became, and the operatic element. I don't know if rock opera might be a way to describe that. And this is actually a variation of that last main theme that we heard at the end of part 2A. It's interesting that we heard that with the full rock outfit, and then I don't think it was acoustic guitars, but it was clean electrics. And now we're hearing it on violin and piano.
No eternal chord.
Really getting a lot of mileage out of this.
There is no reward.
We have the organ back from previously, but this section's a variation, I think. Now this sounds new to me though. I don't really hear any tiebacks to the last, I don't know, 5 minutes of music. And I don't know if it's connected to the first couple of minutes of I've Been Walking either. Now, if my idea of different sounding outros is correct, we should be turning into an outro pretty soon. This seems a bit early given the pattern I have found. Yeah, not an outro yet. This is interesting. There's still a little bit of tension here, but for the most part, this feels calming. Yeah, that's very positive chord right there. Ooh, a little rhythmic shift is nice. Indeed. So this sort of disrupts a lot of my theories on the album so far. It has a totally different approach to the music writing. Harmonically, we can still see some similarities here, but melodically, what kind of ideas the guitars are playing, types of instruments and layering we see in here. There's a lot of different ideas. Even the structure, I'd say, is completely new. We also don't have the outro in here, so that kind of obliterates my whole read on that. Unless this is supposed to be a subversive track, and maybe Death Room, our final song, ends up having that an outro to it that's sort of different from the rest of the track. I could also just be seeing patterns where there aren't any. I don't have the full picture yet, and so maybe isolated events that just happen to be coincidentally done similarly. That's how I'm reading it. Also, the other thing is just a lack of a large swath of information, too. Most albums, if we get halfway through and I've seen a consistency in how the endings are handled, we're talking about 5 or 6 tracks. That's a pretty hefty amount of information to say that there is a pattern. Here we're talking about 2 songs. So while it was technically a pattern at the time, two's not a very big number to have a lot of confidence in extrapolating that into a hypothesis. So that definitely happened here. It's an interesting thing about having such a small number of songs on an album. At least for a first time listening to it analytically like this is trying to find recurring ideas, and there really isn't a lot of time for that to happen. You have to take the whole song in because there's only and the whole album because there's only 4 songs total. So yeah, this one kind of goes in a different direction. I'd also say that, well, let's just dive into a specific topic here, which is harmony. There's definitely some tenser, darker sections here, but for the most part, I would say that this reaches a sort of overwhelming area by way of layers more so than harmony. A lot of the harmonic area in this is primarily looking at something that feels wistful, maybe. It's a little bit of a longing and a little bit of a tiredness, maybe. They sort of go hand in hand. It's a want for something else, whereas a tired is a want for rest, for change, maybe. But it's not heavy, it's not tense, it's not dark or even dangerous like the other 2 songs on the album so far. It's missing a lot of that bite. In fact, most of this, I would say, other than maybe the built up part in 2A, once we finally add all those layers and hit that big moment around like, what was it, like minute 2 or 3 into that would be the part that I think has the most weight and bite to it. We also have the distorted electric guitars in there, bringing not only the timbral bite, but also some darker chords that we just don't hear again elsewhere in the track. And it doesn't weigh the song down the way that we've seen the other 2 tracks get weighed down by it. Whereas The Wizard of Altai Mountains and I've Been Walking Part 1 was really about bouncing back and forth between these 2 extremes, the levity and the danger, the darkness. This one tries to walk a road down the middle, bringing elements of both sides in much smaller amounts in order to keep something that feels balanced throughout rather than teeter-tottering to 2 extremes. It feels measured in a lot of ways, and comparatively, it feels a little less clear about its emotional intentions and emotional weight. And maybe that's just me. I'd be interested to see how other people interpret this song, but given how clear the other sections on this album have been, this one feels not necessarily underbaked, just underexposed, maybe, where the emotions aren't worn quite on the sleeve and you really have to dig down a little bit for them, which has led me to not have as strong of a read on the emotional resonance of this one. But I do like the general growth of the harmony throughout this track too, the chord progression, the emotion of it. Like I said, it does kind of dance a little bit around. We do reach a heavier, darker section partway through 2A, but generally 2B, the entire side, is a bit on the lighter side of things, and that does dominate the general sound of the song. But we do have a brand new way of writing the music. I mentioned in the genre topic that I kind of feel this is related to post rock. We got a straight up post rock style layering slow burn thing going on at the beginning of this song. We started off with two ideas. I think it was drums and guitar, very light. We had the vocals on top of that. We still keep things light generally. Then we add some electric guitars, the violin, piano. I think there's an organ that gets thrown in here. It gets incredibly dense, and some of these instruments are bringing in darker harmonic ideas. And it takes what was rather light. I don't want to say like flight. It wasn't like flying through the air and that sort of lack of gravity, but it was something that felt a bit lighter on the shoulders, just less of a weight, I suppose, less of a burden. And we began to stack things on top of it. It created something that felt incredibly dense musically, but also with the new tones and timbres, or the new tones coming in, it puts more and more weight on the listener until we get to the distorted electric guitars that brings in something that feels punchy. It feels like it has a bite once again. It returns me to some of the feelings I felt during I've Been Walking Part 1. After this, though, we go to a new section, and I wrote it down as rock opera-esque. This part's tough for me to describe. There is definitely some operatic singing with a production on it that feels very old-timey. It's kind of scratchy, lots of clipping and loss of detail to it. Well, it's like a sepia tone, like the sonic representation of that. That's what it reminds me of. That's crazy. How'd they do that? I mean, I know how they did it, but it's like if I tried to do that same thing, I doubt anyone would describe it as like the sonic representation of sepia toning a picture. That's impressive. It's the details, right? I could get like 70% there, but it's the other 30% that's really gonna lock that in. Uh all right. Anyways, that's just cool. But there's like still rock ideas going on. I don't think musically anything's really changed much. Harmonically, we are not playing classical or operatic music here. Rock opera even doesn't feel quite right in like the traditional sense of what rock opera sounds like. It just sounds like, I don't know, like a folksy, roxy thing with some semi-operatic vocals on top of it. It's an interesting idea. But what is more important, I think, here, rather than the vocal delivery, is this main melodic idea. We start off with a phrase that takes up 3.5 beats in bar 1, and bar 2, we have a snare hit on the third beat. We do this for quite some time, building up a couple of things around it, introducing the core harmonic feature of this section. And then we transform it a little bit, retaining many of the same ideas rhythmically and harmonically, but shifting the rhythm around a little bit. Instead of 3.5 beats, we're going to condense it down to just 3, and we're going to put it at the end of the phrase, taking us from 3, 4 into 1. Slightly different than starting on 1 and going to 3, which had the concept of starting an idea and sort of allowing it to meander. And now we're wrapping up an idea and beginning a new one. This inversion that we have retains itself for much of the song. Even as we begin to remove ideas, change the harmonic function that's going on, this idea of 3, 4, 1, of creating tension and direction and then landing at a more resolved point and looping the phrase over again. This shows up so much, not just in the end of part 2A, but also in pretty much all of part 2B. And I know this is all just one song, but I feel like it's easier to talk about it that way, since a lot of the song, well, first of all, we're just talking about 12 minutes of music. So anyway, we can chop that up in a way that I can more easily showcase where these ideas are showing up. I think I'm just going to run with that. But it is interesting because this is an inversion of something we've already done. Harmonically, though, I mentioned that there's little changes on this too, but we retain a lot of that core feeling here of maybe not necessarily feeling lost, but feeling tired. Just a continuous cyclical thing. Oh, speaking of cycles, we got to talk about chord progressions too. But we actually hear another change to this lead rhythm too. I don't remember what it was. It was a bit of a switch up. I think we just went to quarter notes, like 4 quarter notes or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but I had mentioned that it was a variation on that theme that we had been exploring this entire time. I wish I had sheet music for it. Maybe it's something that I would transpose on a second listen just to kind of figure out exactly what's going on there. But I would wager that if we remove the opening 3 minutes of I've Been Walking and we explore just the other 12 and a half, sorry, 9.5, we would find that pretty much everything in here is a variation of that original theme. Everything is built on that. The harmony is a variation of what we heard in that original idea around minute 4 or 5 of 2A. Rhythmically, we continue to just alter small parts of this or where it's placed in the bar. I'd even say that melodically, a lot of this is very similar and expanding on the simplistic melody that we saw the first time through. When we get to the end of this track, everything there is built on what we had seen previously. Nothing there is really brand new. They do take it in some wide sweeping changes towards the end. The connections are harder to see, but I guarantee they are there. And I find that to be the most interesting part of this track. Tracks 1 and 2 kind of did their own thing. I mean, 2 was a short track, but song 1, I mean, it kind of did its own thing. We had 2 ideas, we bounced back and forth between them. Not a lot of movement there. Here we have a ton of movement, but it's all tied to other things. This is like the purity of post rock right here, is make a 12-minute song out of one concept. And I think they did a phenomenal job of that. Um, yeah, and I think that's where I want to wrap that one up. Now, I mentioned cycles, chord progression. One of the things I praised about I've Been Walking Part 1 is the linear fashion of it. It makes sense in the context of that track of somebody who sees something is off. They've walked the entire world looking for answers and have found none. This is a journey that has taken them forever, and while I'm sure that there is some cyclicality to that metaphorical journey, the concept is that they've gone to every corner of the earth. This is a linear trek to explore everything once to try to find something of significance. That linearity shows up in the chord progressions. Here, though, the chords are very cyclical. There are some deviations at times, but unlike I've Been Walking Part 1, where we had those turns, where we would find some darkness for a little bit, and then we would explore a new direction. We take one of the chords and just move it in a different mode and find something brighter out of that. We don't get that here. The chord progression just sits in the same emotional resonance for the entirety of the song. The chords themselves, there are some movement to them. I noted some 8 chord progressions in here, but the idea is that no matter how long the progression is, it will eventually loop back in on itself, usually only deviating from the loop in order to transition to new ideas. The new ideas are frequently bringing in new progressions themselves, but they are still loops. We will hear that loop over and over until it's time to move to the next idea, and then we'll have a transition progression to take us there. It is very much about cycles this time around, sitting as a sort of yang to part 1's yin. I don't know what that means yet. Hopefully, we'll find out in the lyrics, but I am not expecting anything from those. They've continued to go right over my head. But I do think it's interesting how much of an inverse this is to part one. It's still very much about taking a single idea and trying to maximize it and create a full song out of it. But whereas part one single idea is duality, this is the duality to part one. It's the exact opposite approach. Here we just take one concept and focus on how we can build on iteration rather than build on linear movement. It's fascinating to find these parallels. I have no idea if Gazpacho intended for them or not. I have to assume they did. I think that's the best way to go about with a good faith argument and interpretation, is just to assume that everything was done for a reason. If so, this is just a masterful album in finding all of this. And again, I don't even know what any of it means, honestly. I think they've done a great job at crafting an auditory journey, though, to go along with this manuscript. Again, rather real or not. And they're almost creating a musical narrative to go along with the lyrical one. And I'll be honest, the music makes a lot more sense to me than the lyrics, and maybe that's also by design too. If we approach this from the conceptual angle, the music is theirs. It's their way of interpreting and making sense of this manuscript that they found that makes no sense to them. It's their it's their intent to put reason and logic to that which isn't in the language that they work best with, which is music. And I think they've done a great job at crafting distinct songs here that all feel like they work together. Let me hit some lyrics on this one. And then we'll dive into our, well, like 18, is that what I said? 18-minute outro called Death Room. And this is where things become more indecipherable somehow. At least I kind of had some vague idea of what the other two tracks might have been on about, but this one I'm totally lost on. We have some wordplay at the beginning. It says, hang on if you're not done. A sycamore tree. Call and the scarecrow comes. A sycamore tree, as sick as can be. We repeat the beginning of this, but then it says, third day's the unsettling one. A trick and a treat. From here, much like the end of what was it, the mountain, the Altai mountain, it's just a flurry of word salad. A phrase here that makes sense, but not with the phrase that comes after it, and then that stanza also kind of works in isolation, but doesn't match anything else that's going on around it. It talks about a hazel blonde that climbed to the top of an ever-growing tower, and she told me the secret of the nameless lives that she had written. From there, we jump to an idea of a stone dance that you must do to get through the gates of time. From here, somebody asking if there's news of my boy Jack, and someone replying, not this tide, over and over and over, every time asking a little different way. Do you think he'll come back? Has there been any word of him? The answer is always not this tide. So not today, maybe tomorrow. Then it says, Herald Bluebird. People now know there's no Altai Mountain, no eternal chord, lost a diamond, no El Dorado, there is no reward, no one saw him. Bringing back this idea of nothing fantastic happening, which is what we saw in I've Been Walking Part 1. In fact, the line, there's no El Dorado, comes exactly from that song. Talks about what's left of love is gone and is frozen, buried in snow. It says that they line them up and deck the halls, and now they've got everyone against the wall. Another inmate of the town, Alligator, looks around. The sky is set to cold, and the peace is like a curse. I don't know. I don't think I'm supposed to know. But what I would love, though, is somebody who's really great at analyzing poetry, just has a vast understanding of figurative use of language. Maybe if they could find some threads in here. Because for some reason, I get the feeling Gazpacho is never going to explain what any of this is about. Because, first of all, if they did explain it, it would probably be because they wrote it and it would give away the whole mystique. Is this really something they found in an apartment? If it confuses them just as much as us, then it must not be theirs. So they'll probably stick with that. But I do wonder if there isn't some connective tissue here. I don't know if there's like a poetry area of YouTube. I'm sure there is. I would love to get one of the more popular, knowledgeable channels to look at these lyrics. I'm super curious about it. Because as far as I can tell, it's nonsense, but there's threads, right? There's parts where I'm like, okay, this means this, and this kind of represents that, and they kind of work together if you squint at it and peer through the lens at the proper angle. And the fact that I think I can see threads here, even if I have no idea what they're supposed to mean, is what keeps me coming back to the idea that this might not be as nonsensical as I'm understanding it to be. And that's why I want to get someone more proficient at this to check it out. But since I have nothing else to say on that, we're going to head into the final 20 minutes of this album with the song Death Room and see how Gazpacho wraps this album up. Now I recognize that sound. It's like a spring with a lot of reverb, maybe some formant shifting. I've heard that before. Interesting way to introduce this track. So the whole song's been in 4/4, or this whole album has been in 4/4. But this, with I think some of the most unsettling tones, sounds, even the vocals are distorted. We're in 7/4. Even those bass, I think they're growing in size. Like the number of notes that they play is changing. Yeah. Assuming this doesn't change, this is just going to be a very eerie, unsettling track. So they're keeping much of this same atmosphere. Taking it in a different direction though. It's unsettling still, but I don't think quite as eerie. In fact, there's a lot of beauty to this. You know what's interesting is this kind of went from something a bit dark to something heavy. There's almost a sorrow in this. A feeling of loss. This is a bit more of a lighter uptick. We've removed a lot of the heavier tones for light, brisk, higher pitched notes. More of a staccato look here. It isn't brooding anymore as much as it's dexterous. And of course, as soon as I say that, I was expecting it to grow a little there. This feels... I don't know, man. Feels a little bit like defeat, but not giving up. We got the harp over there trying to brighten things up. And see, this kind of feels like a small town. Something that would be used in like a film or a video game for background music. So we're back to the heavy abrasiveness of part 1, but with some of that lighter dexterity of part 2. Back to the eerie sounds of part 1. The tense harmony with the, uncomfortable textures. That was a neat little idea. Almost feels dreamlike with all of the short metallic sounds and the specific run that we have on this main part in the center. The walking up and down. You know, that reminds me of the humming back in track 2, was that? That's what I was expecting. Okay. So that was mostly heavy, negative, but there was the last two notes of that lead line that had a bit of an upswing. We're kind of moving in that direction here.
We forgot about the silence. We forgot the past was playing dead.
You know, honestly, I was expecting silence at the end. Something a bit more of a peaceful way to wrap this up. Oh, I suppose we did get the silence. That just makes me question the industrial noises even more. If we had just wrapped it up on that, I would have been like, okay, that's that. But instead, they were such a short lived part of the ending. I mean, I guess there's also the chance that for whatever reason, this was supposed to stop at minute 6 and Spotify's cut goes an extra 11 seconds, that silence isn't on the original vinyl or CD. I don't think there's an easy way to. Well, before we start talking about stuff, let me look up how long this song is supposed to be. Alright, yeah. I guess that's the length it's supposed to be. The silence is a part of that. I mean, that's usually. Spotify's usually good, but they're also not perfect. So sometimes they do make mistakes with how their tracks are laid out. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of this song. I'm going to once again talk about it in parts because the song does a great job of being split into 3 distinct ideas here. I think the track listing works really well for conversation and analysis. Part 1 is Eerie, and it's creepy. And it taps into some of the sounds that I think were showcased most heavily on I've Been Walking Part 1. It presents something of a danger that we saw in that song that we didn't really see much of elsewhere. Altai Mountains really looked at more of a positive spin of things. And I've Been Walking Part 2 towed the line between those two extremes. This brings us back to a pretty dark extreme. Most of this is harmonic. The sounds that we're hearing and the way that those pitches correlate to each other and what kind of levels of tension that creates. It's dark, it's ominous, there's danger around us. This is not a safe part of a song. But there's something present here that has sort of been on the outskirts of a lot of this already. Ornamental ideas. We have heard organs and violins and cellos and pianos, I think, even all across this album. There's been a lot of instruments outside of the core rock quintet. Quartet. There we go. Guitar, bass, drums, vocals. but they've always been traditional acoustic instruments. The accordion, too. Can't forget about that. But they have continued to elevate the music, whether it's to make it feel more light, possibly ethereal at times, whether it's to make it feel more intense. The accordion made the song, that was the second one, right? Wizard of Altai Mountains. Made it feel very dancey. They've always elevated the general feeling coming from the core harmony. We don't really see anything different here in that regard. It's just the tones that are different. Rather than traditional instruments, this sounds very much like industrial electronic music. All sorts of very harsh, abrasive, distorted sounds. As far as my ear can tell, I don't hear a lot of traditional musical timbres in here. For all I know, this is completely electronic. Regardless, it creates a very unsettling vibe. It's, like I mentioned, abrasive, it's noisy, it's aggressive in every way. And when you pair that with the atmosphere just being really dark and eerie and tense, it comes off as, I think, the most dangerous part of the entire album. There is one other element, though, that helps this feel more off kilter, and that's the time signature coming in with that 7/4 or 7/8 if you prefer to count it out a bit faster. I don't really have anything else to add to that. All those elements together create something just really intense. It deviates from this at times, though. Some of the industrial instruments get pulled out of the mix. There is a section in here that felt like we were pushing towards a 4/4, like it really wanted to. It just never went to that realm. I think it wasn't until the end of part 1 that began our transition into part 2 did we escape that 7. But we do bring in some lighter tones. The vocals, first of all, have a bit of brighter, well, not brighter, airy breathiness to them. Something that indicates, at least to me, when paired with the notes themselves in the melody, something a bit softer and lighter. Stark contrast to the dark, heavy, aggressive tones. This is something that's actually been happening a lot on this album. I've brought it up twice, I think. Lead instruments subverting the atmosphere. Whether it was Wizards of Altai Mountains having, I think it was that one, having the really staccato, almost percussive underlying parts with the drums, the guitars, I think the harp even, and some bells, versus the very legato, almost slurred vocal line. We've seen dark, eerie, not really eerie, just I guess just dark and heavy atmospheric stuff with lighter, more uplifting vocal melodies. And I've Been Walking Part 1. I've Been Walking Part 2 was rather harmonious, I think, where the instruments and the vocals are finally coming together into a specific idea. But here we go again, Death Room. The vocals are a bit softer and lighter than the rest of the instrumentation. It creates a stark contrast to it. At the end of this, we introduce a 4/4 to bring us into part 2, which retains a lot of the weight of part 1, but approaches it from a different angle. It retains the darkness, but instead of being antagonistic and dangerous, it finds a beauty in it. There are still some edgy tones being used as far as digital instrumentation, but for the most part, I found this to be rather gorgeous, honestly. Some parts of it. Others, they leaned more into that opening sound of part 1, going for something a bit darker and angry, but this just kind of felt like a type of brooding, honestly. There's parts of it where it gives up that for something a bit brighter, even optimistic maybe at times, but it's fleeting. Almost as if it's a mask trying to put up a false hope and immediately taking it down. Yeah, that's not going to work. Let's get back to the brooding side of things. It's interesting to hear the song not necessarily flip flop, but attempt to find something out of this. I also mentioned here that this track felt more melancholic. It brings back some of the feelings of longing that I talked about in I've Been Walking Part 2 and explores them with a bit less optimism about ever finding what they're searching for. There's a few parts in part 2. I find that interesting. Part 1 was rather simple. We have this one sound. We subverted a bit at the end, but most of that journey is pretty one-sided. Part 2 jumps around between a bunch of ideas. So where does part 3 take us? Well, much like when we looked at I've Been Walking Part 1, The Wizard of Altai Mountains, and I've Been Walking Part 2, where we have two extremes and then a middle point, Death Room Part 3 is the middle point to Parts 1 and 2. It still finds a way to bring some of those edgier, darker sounds. In fact, we end the album on those. It's still antagonistic and abrasive, but it also finds way to work in beauty into all of this as well. It is rather gloomy and dim, but it also has moments of positivity in it too. Not really hope anymore, but maybe a muted joy. It's quite complex from an emotional angle. I'd love to see what any of you might have felt through this journey and kind of your emotional exploration of this album. How did it make you feel throughout? But I think that's it for me. I've Been Walking sets up a dark and dangerous journey ahead. The Wizard of Altai Mountains focuses on a bit of relief, possibly because at that time he finally found the demon he had been looking for. And I've Been Walking Part 2 finds a bit of a middle point, bringing the energy down. No longer joyous or tense and distressed, just sort of somewhere in the middle. This energy is spiked up in Death Room, and it continues to find high energy elements, whether it is on the darker, eerie, or tense side, or if it's trying to reach something that's brooding, slightly optimistic, or even hints of joy at the end. I think they've done a fantastic job with this album. From a purely musical perspective, which primarily because we haven't touched on the final lyrics here, but secondarily because I don't think it's going to change my interpretation of anything. I think they've done a fantastic job at crafting a mood album. There are some interesting moving ideas in here. The entire accordion part from Wizard of Altai Mountains is interesting. I still don't really know how it fits into anything else, but it's a fun idea. The opening of I've Been Walking Part 2, the entire acoustic guitar line there is gorgeous. There's quite a few moving bass lines in here that I loved, and the vocal melodies are just absolutely beautiful. There's definitely moving parts in here, and they're great. But to me, they pale in comparison to a lot of the harmonic and textural work going on. This entire album to me is one about capturing a vibe, and I think they do a fantastic job of that. I've tried to express what that vibe is. I think I've done a decent job of it, but I feel like there's still so much more to uncover on subsequent listens to fully grasp what the story is that's being told here. And I'm not even talking about the lyrical side. I don't know if I would ever get that, but there's so many musical ideas, and I'm sure that having heard Death Room, going back to the beginning of the album, I might catch some things going on there that are not necessarily callbacks, but in the proper sense would be foreshadowing. There's so many parallels, ideas, patterns, recurring concepts that I see all across this album. For me to sit here and think that the first track and final track aren't connected somehow is ridiculous. I am pretty sure there's some musical ideas there that I just didn't know would be presented later on. That's not to say that I think the album is cyclical. I just think that the album does a great job of referencing itself. It does so consistently on a completely forward moving listen through. But having the knowledge of how it ends and starting it over, I think is going to shed a lot of light on some of the musical decisions and choices in the first half of the album. All right, I'm going to find some lyrics for Death Room, and then we're going to wrap this one up. Now, why does some of this make sense? I'm coming to the conclusion that the demon isn't real. Or that even within the author of the manuscript, there's an acknowledgement that the demon is just themselves. Because if we follow the titles of the songs, we have I've Been Walking, and then The Wizard of Altai Mountains, and then I've Been Walking and Death Room. The way I read this is the person walked to this wizard and then walked back to where they would die. That this journey is what the chronicles of the manuscript cover. But what if they were never chasing a demon? What if they were just chasing themselves? What if they were truly an immortal of sorts? Just follow me with this. It says there's a sadness in the stars, whose fires silver line the night, the madness of never having fully lived. All I have is here. So we have somebody who has lived forever since the beginning of the earth. The Big Bang happens, the earth is formed, and this person is there at that moment and chronicles every bit of this planet, scouring every corner for information, looking for something worthwhile, something spectacular. As we explored in, I think it was track 1, they found nothing of worth here. It's just a rock in space. He says, despite having done all of that, I've never fully lived. All that I have here, or all that I have is here, just what's around me. As we read through this, we will realize that they don't have anyone around them. They have some things, sure, they have information, sure, but they've made no social connections. Says tangible, history, my reward, eternity, memory, cornerstone, follow me, leave it all, obsolete, bittersweet. I really love this idea here of an immortal sitting in the room where they will die. Just think of that contradiction right there. They have lived through every cataclysmic event on this earth for billions of years, and they're going to die here alone. For what reason? I think that is really what sticks to me on this. I think it's one thing to be mortal, to understand in some part of your body that you will die someday. It helps drive so many choices and decisions in life, and it also allows so much of life to have meaning, knowing just how fleeting it can be, how fragile we are. There's a lot of media about people on their deathbed, both from the perspective of a loved one who is watching someone important to them slowly pass away, and from the perspective of the ones who are on the deathbed, knowing their time is nigh. What how does an immortal approach this. Death was never a concept to them. I think the contradiction of understanding, feeling somewhere in your gut that soon, in the next couple of hours, you're going to pass away, but you're also immortal, could fracture the psyche. That there's no way to reconcile that. Death has never meant anything to you, and now it is going to consume you because you've never allowed it to be a fraction of what you've put your mind towards. It's never even crossed your mind that anything you've done would need to have impact or worth in the span of a lifetime, whatever that lifetime may be, because yours is infinite. I think that's where we walk in on this person. They look at everything they have. They say, my reward for all of this hard work is a memory of all eternity. I can leave it all behind, but it's obsolete already. It's not complete. The moment I pass away, it will be incomplete, and every second that passes on, it will be less complete. Mentions it's a bittersweet feeling. Says he ran to hide and kept a log about his fear. It was a small relief. He wants to sink and sleep with them. They're in his dreams. He hears them whisper of this nothing as every night gets darker. It doesn't say who the them is, but I want to believe it's humanity. Of all of this, he made zero human connection or even emotional connection at all, whether even if that's with an animal, It's having an animal pal sit on your shoulder or something. Company is something this person never understood, and now that's all he wants to do is be more sociable. Humans, he wants to sink into them. He wants to sleep next to them. They dominate his dreams. He hears them all of the time. It's almost an envy here. He says that there's city lights in the Nordens, but they're not real. 1,000 lives slow below him. Perfect paranoia is a perfect defense against them all, but you destroy what you're defending. Basically, it seems that he's talked himself into thinking he's better off this way, but anything that he could have offered is completely null and void now. At least that's how I read that. I've been trying to figure out what this is. It says you destroy what you're defending. Maybe it's not about defending them, but about defending himself, his heart, possibly. That's what it is, isn't it? Perfect paranoia is a perfect defense. He's afraid of them, so he doesn't mingle with them. But he still wants that. He still needs that connection. And so he's destroyed his heart by forcing himself into a life of solitude. He tried to protect his heart and ended up failing it. There's a stanza a couple later. It's a back and forth. The one side says, unlimited, illuminate. The universe reflects the hate of our dirty minds. On reptile wings, the hardest times of worldly lives from dust to dust long for rain. I feel it's multifaceted. It basically, at least to me, on the surface, says that the worst that humans can be is what is reflected most often. I think that's interesting for someone who's chronicled the history of a planet. And I know right now I've completely abandoned this whole I'm searching for a demon thing and basing a lot of this on like 4 lines from the first track. But stick with me. I think there's some emotional meat on this bone. But here's the interesting thing is that each of these phrases is split up by something else. We have unlimited, she's leaving, illuminate, to be free, the universe, be free, reflects the hate, spent life of our dirty minds on edge. On reptile wings, she lost the hardest times her daughter. It says, of worldly lives from dust to dust, our cold touch longs for rain on a rainy day. I think both of these lines make sense in and of themselves, but when you bring them together, it's really interesting. It paints the picture of somebody so heartbroken that they wish to be free of the pain, that even when it rains, they would wish for more rain, anything to make them feel a little better. But also the idea of wishing for rain while the worst is happening as a way to wash away any destruction that occurred. It paints the picture, at least to me, of focusing on the biggest incidences, looking at everything from the most macro level. It says the universe reflects the hate of humanity. But on the micro level, too, we see somebody who loses their daughter. And both wish for the same thing, hoping to wash this pain away. Metaphorically through rain, as I think that's a pretty strong metaphor, as water washes things. To me, it's about talking about scope. He could explore the entire planet, or he could have explored a little city. He chose to chronicle this giant rock when he could have chronicled humanity. He could have interacted with humanity. The parallels of what's big and small. Just because it's larger doesn't make it more important. And just because it's larger doesn't mean it doesn't have parallels with what is smaller. You can find similar experiences on multiple levels of focus. He calls this unthinkable, though, derived from a made up truth. It says you put up a play and no one knows it's you, so you elude the hate, disguised and counterfeit. You see the blue beyond the sky through the beam within your eye, and it shatters as if it matters. Now, I like this. Once again, we're talking about protecting yourself and harming yourself through that protection. It says that we made up a truth. I assume that truth is that I would be better off with humanity, at least from the narrator's perspective, that they thought they would be better off alone. And so they continued to go along with this lie. It said they created a play. But nobody knows that you're the one who's in the play. You get to hide among everyone. You get to be a hidden part of the world. And you do this to disguise and counterfeit and avoid the hate. So you don't have to deal with that. You're basically saying some bad things could happen, so I'm just chucking the entire thing out. I'm not even going to take a chance on it. Now, the idea about seeing beyond the sky through a beam in your eye, I don't know, man. I've skipped a couple of stanzas. I'm going to admit, not everything is working within my perspective and read on this. Now we do have this line here, and this I think continues to solidify some of my perspective here. It says, I lived the war, I felt the rain, the muddy boots, I lived the pain, I traveled seas and moors and conquered fears, I settled scores. Or was that just the man within my head? Was it a lie? This I think is interesting. It speaks of a separation of the self. One of who is presented and the one that you keep withheld. It returns back to the idea of masks, of playing a part. He wonders if any of this was actually even him. After spending all of this time following this singular goal that he did just to avoid connection, he lost himself, not just his heart. He lost his sense of identity too, becoming someone who he doesn't even know that he wanted to be. Right after this, he says, heavy gloom and darkest blood. It scared me into rebellion. I like this line though. It says, it's convenient that I'm reasonable. To the mind, it's my time. I almost want to say that this is a decision to change right here. I think it could be read in a couple of different ways, but that's the way I want to read it. He says that now his eyes open, he rises above, calls it as absurd as love, but we can navigate it. Says the ideals were wrong, lived by everyone. We forgot about the silence, we forgot about the past. We forgot the past was playing dead. I think that's interesting. It talks about how the things behind us we typically think of as immutable. And in a sense, it is. We can't change the past, but that doesn't make it any less lived, any less alive. The song wraps up, all our idols fed the dogs on broken wishes that they stole. They called it love and called the weak, this tired earth. I've been wrestling with this because if my entire interpretation here is that we have somebody lamenting the loss of their time, how they feel they've wasted their life as immortal as they thought they were, here they seem to be backpedaling a little bit. But I think it's more of an acknowledgement of how people have historically done what he's done and how that makes him want to stop. He says, our idols have fed the dogs on broken wishes and called it love. This idea that the people that we've looked up to, whether they be rulers or whatever, politicians, our kings, just celebrities, that they look down on us and they lie to us. They use love as a way of control. Oh, in fact, actually, idols could be even more than that. Just general people you look up to. Could even be a romantic partner. Someone who appears to have your well-being at the heart of their concentration, but isn't always. They use the illusion of love to control you instead. I mean, this is what do they call it? Why can't I think of this word? Abusive relationships. There we go. Abusive relationship 101. He says that they feed us broken wishes. They give us stuff that isn't worthwhile, and they call it love, and they call the weak through this. So instead of using love for its positive worth, they use it for its worst. Love can do so much as a positive force to change the world. It's what allows us to care for each other, to have empathy, to want tomorrow to be better than today, not just for me or the people close to me, but for everyone. Love of the human race, love of even the planet. But that he has seen people misuse it and abuse love many times. He says that we can't forget that the past is alive. I think the purpose here is to say that we should learn from the past, as the narrator is. They've looked at this and, as far as I can tell, used it as an excuse for their own distancing of emotional connection. But having their eyes opened and rising above all of it, they now see that it's something they should have been embracing this entire time. The final line of Tired Earth, though, I'm not too sure how to read that. By itself, it makes me think the final stanza should be one of giving up, looking at the past, seeing how it tends to happen, how people get controlled by love, and that nothing will change. The earth is tired, it will not fight back. This is just how humanity is. That doesn't really support my read on the rest of this, but again, I'm kind of picking and choosing. I only went through about half of the stanzas on this because the rest I couldn't easily tie into how I viewed this. And again, as I said, my entire interpretation here is kind of hinged on one particular stanza from track 1 that alludes to this being an immortal from the beginning, and maybe that's not how it should be interpreted. Maybe that should also be viewed figuratively or completely wrong. A total lie, just like everything else, as the circumstance of this is, at least told to me, to be the ramblings of someone who's broken from reality. But I can't help, once again, seeing a lot of threads being pulled here. I see a lot of ideas being expressed in different phrases, in different ways, but repeatedly said. This isn't rambling. There's something here. Maybe some of this is noise that needs to be disregarded, but maybe it's actually exceptionally elaborate poetry. Once again, I would love for somebody whose job is to analyze language, prose, poetry, even, and hear an expert dissect this entire album, but Death Room, I think, in particular, I'm most interested about. That's going to wrap this one up, though. Those are my thoughts on Gazpacho's Demon. I was going to call it Death Room. What did you think of this? Did you enjoy it? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you just have a different interpretation of things. Please put all of that down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. That wraps it up for today, though there is another album review if you're interested in that. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the live stream, and then Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will begin next week's theme. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.